What's up, brats? Today, we're going to review every survivor in Dead by Daylight and rank them based off of only their best teachable perk. Every survivor has 3 teachable perks, but there's always the definitive standout which holds the most value. Bias is going to be left at the door, but each perk will be rated on its overall value in most matches and situations. Full disclosure, this video is mostly intended for newer players who are still learning perks and unlocking their characters, so I will also be giving a brief description of the perk. Let's get started and go in order of release. Dwight's best perk is Bond, and this is solely down to the above average value you're going to get out of it every match. With Bond, you see the aura of teammates within 36 meters, which is great to avoid taking chase of them. For healing, finding a heal, setting up for a save, but my personal favorite, knowing where the chase is if you're in terror radius. This last part is insanely strong since you're going to know when it's time to get distance from the chase and where some of the map resources have been spent. Now, I'll be honest, this is hands down my absolute favorite perk in DbD. Bond is in every build I run, I never leave home without it. The consistent strength of this perk alone lands Dwight at the top of A tier. Meg's best perk is Sprint Burst, go figure. Sprint Burst gives you a 50% haste when you begin running for 3 seconds and then causes exhaustion for 40 seconds.
They can run really fast.
It's not only one of the most popular perks in the game, but it's hands down one of the easiest chase extenders available from an original character, which is great since that means it's free. The beautiful thing about Sprint Burst is regardless of your skill level or experience in the game, you're gonna get value. When you're new to the game, it'll help buy some distance at the start of the chase, and once you've got some experience behind you, you're gonna learn how to 99 it to use it mid-chase. With all that said, Meg is all the way at the top of S tier, and given we're now 10 years into this game's release, I doubt that's gonna change anytime soon without a very specific nerf or a new broken perk. Claudette's best perk is Botany Knowledge, which increases all heals in the trial by 50%. There's no shortage of healing perks in DbD, but what makes Botany stand out is it's very simple, plus 50% to all heals throughout the trial. And for those who haven't run it in a while or weren't aware, there's no longer a medkit penalty for self-healing. A good competitor would obviously be the general perk Will Make It, which is going to double your healing speed for a time after you unhook a survivor, but Botany's consistent 0 activation value remains my favorite. Simply put, Botany is consistently valuable, which places Claude towards the bottom of A tier. Jake's best perk is Iron Will, which completely silences your grunts of pain while you're injured so long as you're not exhausted. Since you can't be exhausted, this does limit the use of exhaustion perks in your build. However, the value you get from denying additional tracking info, especially against spirits and Draculas, makes up for it. Or of course when you're playing survivors like Leon or Claire. Now that Iron Will is back to the full 100%, this lands Jake towards the middle of A tier. Nia's best perk is Balanced Landing, which gives a 50% haste for 3 seconds when you fall from a great height and also silences your fall sounds and reduces the landing stagger by 75%. Balance is one of those exhaustion perks I almost never run on Survivor, but when I see a Survivor running it as a villain, I know it's time to drop the chase. With the drop requirement for this perk, it can be difficult to trigger on some maps or when it's most convenient in chase, which is going to land this exhaustion perk towards the middle of C tier. Bill's best perk is Unbreakable, which lets you fully recover from the dying state once per trial with an additional 35% recovery speed bonus. Unbreakable is one of those perks where you're not going to get value out of it every trial, but when you do, it can quite literally save the entire match if they're going for a 4-man slug or if the team is playing very aggressive. Like some other perks, there's no shortage of additional anti-slug perks that have been entered into the game, but Unbreakable's original 0 activation requirement is going to land it towards the middle of A tier. Lori's best perk is Decisive Strike, and it's remained a player-based favorite since its release due to the strong ability to help prevent a tunnel on yourself. After getting unhooked, there's a 60-second window where if you go down again and are picked up, you can land a difficult skill check to get back on your feet so long as you didn't perform a conspicuous action within that time frame. Now, if you didn't buy the Halloween chapter back in January before it was removed from the store, this perk is going to show up as Will to Live. But since Lori was in the game for 9 years before the license was pulled, the rest of us are going to keep calling it DS and consider it a Lori perk. DS is one of the most used perks due to the insurance policy it gives from being tunneled out early or mid-trial, so naturally it lands right up here at the bottom of S tier. Ace's best perk is Open-Handed, which extends the aura reading perks for the entire team by 16 meters. The cool thing about Open-Handed is that while it doesn't stack, only one teammate has to run it for the entire team to gain value for perks like Bond, Wiretap, or Kindred, which leads to some pretty cool team builds. Since Open-Handed is a support perk with moderately decent value, best used in Swifts, I'm going to place it down here towards the bottom of C tier. Fung's best perk is Lithe, which gives a 50% haste for 3 seconds after performing a medium or fast vault with a 40-second exhaustion. Now, Lithe has been consistently in the top 5 perk slot for years due to its vault activation requirement, unlike Sprint Burst. Not having to manage your exhaustion and using Lithe mid-chase is great for buying distance to stronger loops. However, some reports show that using Lithe consistently will lead to something called Life Brain, where you'll abandon the safety of Shack to a complete dead zone. Still, even with this potential side effect, Lithe gives insane value, which is going to place it all the way up here in S tier. David's best perk is Dead Hard, which gives half a second of endurance on demand, but only after you've been hooked, while you're injured, not exhausted, and not already in deep wound. After use, you become exhausted for 40 seconds. Even with all these requirements, and after years of being nerfed from the original Dead Hard for distance, it remains a player-based favorite as a chase extender. Since the look back is evidential and the endurance is only half a second, landing a perfectly timed Dead Hard honestly feels more like a minigame with a great payoff. With the obvious strength of this perk, David is going to land right up here in S tier. Quentin's best perk is Vigil, which reduces a myriad of effects for not only the survivor running the perk, but also for any survivor within its range. Vigil is one of the strongest support perks, with the team share element that is largely used to remove exhaustion, but it can also limit many villain power effects such as the Clown's bottles or Freddy's snares. Since Vigil is technically just a support perk and is never run on its own, I'm looking at you, Sprint Burst, I'm placing it towards the top of B tier. Tap's best perk is Stakeout, which you're never going to see run without its girlfriend Hyperfocus, one of Rebecca's perks. Stakeout grants a token for every 15 seconds you spend chilling out of chase while in tear radius that converts good skill checks to great ones. Obviously, this is run with Hyperfocus to help rush gens, but this can also be used on heals. Since this perk is largely ineffective against undetectable villains and is token based with the requirement of Hyperfocus, I'm going to place it down here at the bottom of C tier. Kate's best perk, and I know this is going to be shocking, is Windows of Opportunity. You know, the #1 most used survivor perk in DbD. Windows shows the auras of windows, pallets, and breakable walls within 32 meters, but if you ask any Windows user what they see, it's usually something like this.
Look at this room, so much wood.
This perk is one of the most dangerous assets an experienced looper has at their disposal for resource identification and to extend chases. Due to its strength in chase, this lands Kate right behind Meg in S tier. Adam's best perk is the solo queue savior Deliverance, or Deli for short. With Deli, you get a guaranteed self unhook on your first hook so long as you performed a safe unhook earlier in the trial. Performing the self unhook does leave you broken for 60 seconds, but the benefit you get from being able to save yourself in endgame or before going struggle if your teammates aren't proving too reliable can't be understated. The only real downside of this perk is called the Deli effect, where if you run it, most likely you're going to be the first one hooked in the trial. Still, the strength of Deli is going to land Adam towards the middle of A tier. Jeff's perks are largely ineffective, but the definitive standout would have to be Breakdown. With Breakdown, whenever you're unhooked, it sabos the hook for 180 seconds and reveals the villain's aura for 6 seconds. This perk is a bit of a mixed bag, as it can technically deny them from using pain res tokens or from hooking altogether if there's no other hooks in the area, but with slugging as an option to add pressure back, the exact value remains pretty situational for every trial. With this in mind, I'd place Jeff towards the middle of C tier. Jane's best perk is Head On.
Apply directly to the forehead.
With Head On, after you've entered a locker for 4 seconds, you can perform a fast exit to stun the villain for 3 seconds if they come within 2.5 meters of the locker. This works for both regular stuns and also for saving if they're carrying. After being used, you gain exhausted for 40 seconds. While it's definitely more on the fun side of perks rather than valuable, I'm going to place it down here in C tier strictly due to its limited usage in trials, the exhausted effect, and also only the 3-second stun. Ash's perks are all pretty mediocre, but as far as the standout goes, it'd have to be Metal and Man. With Metal, after you've taken 3 protection hits, the next hit that would have put you in the dying state from injured is ignored, except by the villain, who will definitely claim cheats in endgame chat. The unique thing about Metal is it ignores all deep wound related limitations, which means Metal will still work even if you're already in deep wound, but also doesn't give you deep wound once it's activated. There is the limiter, which is going to reveal your aura to the villain when you're outside of a 16-meter range and at full health. However, with the extra life it gives, you're probably looking for a chase anyway. Even with this unique ability, this perk's activation can take almost an entire match to trigger, which is going to place Ash at the bottom of C tier. Nancy's best perk is Fixated, which contrary to popular belief is not there for you to see your own scratch marks. Fixated increases your walking speed by 20%, which is excellent for not only removing exhaustion mid-chase, but also for breaking chase by walking when you can. A hidden feature of this perk a lot of players don't know about is that the additional haste given by Fixated takes you from walking to a full run faster than it would normally, which makes check spots a little more effective. This places Nancy towards the middle of A tier. Steve's best perk is Babysitter. With Babysitter, after you unhook a survivor, you see the villain's aura for 8 seconds, and the unhooked survivor gets 30 seconds of suppressed scratch marks and pools of blood, as well as 10% haste added in. While there are plenty of anti-tunnel perks in the survivor roster, Babysitter is a standout because it gives that survivor their best shot by boosting them post-unhook and limiting the potential of one of the strongest villain strategies of tunneling. Based on its strength in both solo queue and swift games, this lands Steve towards the top of B tier. Yui's best perk is Lucky Break, which is saying something since Yui is my favorite example of a survivor with 3 good perks, none of them great, none of them bad. With Lucky Break, after you've been injured, you leave no scratch marks or pools of blood for up to a max of 60 seconds. This perk is put on pause after you're healed or enter the dying state, and can be recharged 1 second for every second you spend healing another survivor back up to its full 60-second max duration. Lucky Break is one of those perks I'd recommend primarily for newer players, since looping takes hundreds if not thousands of hours to get down. And since Yui is an original character, unlocking this perk and her others early on is more than doable. With its passive power and no skill required to gain value from, I'd place Yui towards the middle of B tier. Zarina's best perk is For the People. With FTP, you can instantly pick up a survivor from the dying state, helping deny the villain a tunnel, but there are two very serious drawbacks to this. First, FTP can only be activated when you're at full health, which will then leave you injured and broken for 60 seconds. Second, FTP will pick up the survivor from the dying state. However, you're going to have to run a perk like We're Gonna Live Forever, which is a David perk, or they're going to have to run Soul Guard, which is a Cheryl perk, if you want them to have endurance to then take a protection hit for you after you've made yourself an easy target. Even with its build dependency, FTP can save a match by preventing a 3v1 early on, which lands Zarina towards the bottom of B tier. Cheryl's best perk is Soul Guard, which gives you the endurance effect whenever you're picked up from the dying state. In addition to this, whenever you're under the effect of a Hex Totem, you can pick yourself up from the dying state an unlimited amount of times, like a very specific Unbreakable. One of the most frustrating things in this game is getting picked up and then instantly slugged again, so running Soul Guard can be a good option, which is going to place Cheryl down towards the middle of C tier. Felix's best perk is Built to Last, which grants diminishing recharges on fully depleted items after you hold them in a locker for 10 seconds. The first time recharges an item to 99%, second time is 66%, and the third time is 33%, after which the perk is disabled for the rest of the trial. This perk can be used on your item or on a teammate's, but the diminishing returns still apply. Having extra charges on whatever item it is that you're bringing in can be pretty beneficial. However, the diminishing returns and the forced interaction with lockers is going to place Felix at the bottom of B tier. Elodie's best perk is Deception, although I mostly know it as the perk to go, oh my god, he tricked the lurker. Deception works like how you'd fast vault into a locker. However, instead of actually vaulting in the locker, it plays the door animation and sound, and the villain receives the usual loud noise notification. Also, your scratch marks and pools of blood are suppressed for 5 seconds, which means you can make a clean getaway to the safety of remaining inside to make sure that the villain fell for your silly play. I'm guessing you can tell by my tone, but Deception is honestly just not the best. It can be a fun perk, but once you've shown your cards, the perk is worthless for the rest of the trial, and it's really not that strong to begin with. This places Elodie at the bottom of D tier. Yunjin's best perk is Smash Hit, which is activated after a successful pallet stun and gives 50% haste for 4 seconds and leaves you exhausted. Now this perk is a standout due to its very precise requirements to activate, which means you can loop like normal without having to manage your exhaustion. The real benefit is you get a second longer than you do with Sprint Burst or Live, and you are only exhausted for 20 seconds, which means it's entirely doable to remove your exhaustion mid-chase and get Smash Hit value more than once if the villain decides to commit, which they probably won't because it does give generational distance. Due to its high potential and precise gameplay, I'd place Yunjin towards the middle of B tier. Jill's best perk is Resurgence, which gives 70% healing progress after you've been unhooked. One of Survivor's biggest complaint in DbD is camping, and when villains are loosely camping to return to hook to tunnel, having to spend less than 5 seconds to heal an unhooked teammate can be insanely strong. The downside to this perk is both Sloppy Butcher and Scourge Hook Gift of Pain, which can reduce its effectiveness. But still, spending less time under the hook to heal is pretty strong, which is going to place Jill towards the bottom of A tier. Leon's best perk is Flashbang, which charges by completing 40% of a gen and then crafting in a locker. There are so many cool things about Flashbang. First, flashlights blind over time, whereas flashbangs blind all at once. This means if the villain has blind immunity, such as Wesker's Dash Grab or Springtrap's Jump Scare, timing the save can still work where a flashlight save would not. Second, flashbangs are a special item, which means while you're holding one, the villain won't be able to see the item that you're running beneath it. Third, you can have a flashbang crafted in hand while repairing a gen and already charging the next one in advance. Lastly, flashbangs can be used around corners mid-chase to silence the drop sound notification and still get the blind. Flashbang was nerfed or corrected based on the patch notes to be more obvious during the drop and deny the underfoot saves, but still, its potential places Leon at the bottom of A tier. Michaela's best perk is Boon Circle of Healing, which grants a permanent 100% altruistic healing speed while within range of the boon and when not using a med kit. A secondary effect is that all injured survivors have their auras revealed to teammates when within the boon. This perk's strength is solely depending on the villain not kicking the boon after it's been placed and survivors being within its range. Outside of that, I mostly find Michaela's hellbent on only healing within the boon and expecting the Odyssey to occur every time a heal is needed. If set up in main or the center of the map, this perk can hold excellent value. However, its ability to be easily kicked out is going to place Michaela at the top of C tier. Jonah's best perk is Overcome, which extends the haste after being injured by an additional 2 seconds and leaves you exhausted for 40 seconds. Overcome is one of the top perks I'd recommend to newer players, since that additional haste is going to buy even more distance to help extend chase for inexperienced survivors. The main problem with Overcome is that it will work well for non-mobility villains, but it is essentially worthless against the ghouls, blights, nurses, and hillbillies in the game, and of course anyone with an instant down power. This places Jonah towards the bottom of B tier. Yoichi's best perk is Boon Dark Theory, which grants a 3% haste to any survivor within the boon's range and for 4 seconds after leaving the boon. 3% may not sound like that much, but if you're an experienced looper who always ran made for this before it's nerfed, then you understand how 3% can make an insane difference in chase. The positive of this perk also is the negative. It's a boon, which means it applies to the team and can be excellent if the right boon is set up and stays up for the trial, but most often it's going to get kicked out and will need to be set up multiple times. Due to this limitation, this places Yoichi at the top of D tier. Hattie's best perk is Residual Manifest, which has a couple cool features built in. For starters, the first time you rummage any open chest, you're guaranteed to get a green flashlight. The real benefit is whenever you blind a villain by any means, they're afflicted by the blindness effect for 30 seconds, which means no more survivor, gen, or hex auras. This villain blindness is especially strong the closer the match gets to endgame, the only downside being Lightborn, which will render the perk useless for the trial. With all this in mind, I'd place Hattie in C tier. Ada's best perk is Wiretap, which is charged by repairing 40% of a gen. Once charged, any gen with partial progress can be trapped to reveal the villain's aura when they're within 14 meters for up to 2 minutes or until the gen is kicked or completed. Wiretap is one of those perks that can be pretty strong on the right map or with the right support perks. For example, this could be open-handed, which would increase the range to 30 meters, or Blast Mine, which would discourage villains from kicking gens with lower progress. Due to its build necessity and the ability to be easily taken away, I'd place Ada towards the middle of C tier. Rebecca's best perk is Reassurance, which works by pausing a survivor's hook state for 30 seconds when within 6 meters of them. Now for the part you're not expecting, I'm placing Reassurance up in S tier, and let me explain why. Two of the biggest survivor complaints in the game is camping and tunneling, and this perk alone provides insane value to countering both of these strategies. If the survivor is being hard camped on a hook, those additional 30 seconds can easily buy enough time for anti-camp. As for tunneling, the safest place a survivor being tunneled can be is technically on the hook. I know it can be uncomfortable to be reassured and then see your teammate pressuring a gen nearby, but all that time is something that you no longer have to buy and chase. If I haven't convinced you yet, let me remind you that everything in DBD boils down to one thing and one thing only, and that is time. Hook states have time, gen repairs have time, and some of the strongest villain perks in the game are simply a way for them to buy more time before the exit gates are powered and the survivors leave. So with all that said, Reassurance is going to stay up here in S tier. Vittorio's best perk is Quick Gambit, which grants an additional 5% repair speed bonus to all repairing survivors while you're in chase, and it reveals their aura to you. The one downside to Gambit is that it's deactivated for 60 seconds after you lose a health state, but let's be real, it's really minimized the most when you're doing your best looping and no one is on a gen. It's a fun perk to run for experienced loopers who are pretty confident, however, it's a pretty long cooldown, and with minimal boost, that's going to land Vittorio at the top of C tier. Toledo's best perk is Friendly Competition, which is one of the more useless survivor perks in DBD. Friendly Competition only works if you complete repairing a gen with at least one other survivor, after which you and anyone else repairing that gen get a 5% repair speed bonus for the next 2 minutes. The problem with this perk is that it's so situational and the benefits are so minimal, you're better off just not running it. This is going to place Toledo at the absolute bottom of the list in F tier, but don't worry, we do understand why you're playing Toledo. Renato's best perk is Background Player, which activates when the villain picks up a survivor and gives 50% haste for 5 seconds with an exhaustion lasting for only 20 seconds. You'll really only see this perk used for flashlight, flashbang, and even sabo saves as a way to get into position. Another cool feature of this perk is the activation window lasts for 10 seconds, which means that if the villain instant picks and hooks, you can still use Background Player as a way to navigate the map. This is one of DBD's strongest altruism save perks, which places Renato at the top of B tier. Gabriel's best perk is Made for This, which has 2 good effects stacked into one perk. First, whenever you're injured and complete a heal on another survivor, you gain endurance for 10 seconds. And second, whenever you're in deep wound, you gain 3% haste until you mend or enter the dying state. Pretty often, I'll run MFT alongside David's perk We're Gonna Live Forever, which can be pretty insane during a slugging match. The dual strength of this perk is gonna place Gabe at the top of B tier. Nicholas's best perk is Dramaturgy, which is definitely the most unique exhaustion perk in DbD. Dramaturgy works like a mini sprint burst on demand, but it only gives a 25% haste for 2 seconds, followed up by 40 seconds of exhaustion. What makes Drama so unique is that there are 4 randomized events that follow, but the same event cannot happen twice in a row. The first event is that you scream without alerting the villain. The second is you receive a random rare item with a random selection of add-ons included, which can be anything from a toolbox with a brand new part or a flashlight with an eerie bulb. The third and definitely least preferable event is that you become exposed for 12 seconds. And last but best, you could then receive an additional 2 seconds of 25% haste. Like I said, the great thing about Drama is the mini sprint burst on demand, along with the 50% chance of a good effect to follow. The only downside being that it can only be activated when you're at full health, which places Nicholas towards the middle of A tier. Ellen Ripley's best perk, other than being the last survivor of the Nostromo, would have to be Chemtrap. Chemtrap charges after completing 20% repair progress on a gen and can be activated when you're next to a dropped pallet in order to trap it for 60 seconds. If the villain breaks the pallet, they receive a 50% hindered for 4 seconds. The cool thing about Chemtrap is the ability to upgrade a safe pallet into a god pallet, and if there's no resources in the area, when the villain does break the pallet, you'll have generational distance to another safe loop while they're stuck in Frozone mode. This places Ellen at the bottom of B tier. Alan's best perk is Champion of Light, which gives a 50% haste while you're shining your flashlight, but also gives the villain a 20% hindered for 6 seconds when they're blinded by any means. After being activated, this perk has a cooldown of 60 seconds. This is probably the strongest flashlight perk, as it not only helps buy distance in chase, but it can also help you get into position for the same. Another cool thing about it is that it also works on Blast Mine and Flashbang. The only real axe to this perk is Lightborn, which will nullify its value, but hey, if the villain is running Lightborn, then that's just one less gen regression perk to worry about. This places Alan towards the middle of B tier. Sable's best perk is Strength in Shadows, which allows you to self-care without a med kit, but only in the basement and at 70% of the normal healing speed. As an added bonus, when you complete your heal, you're also shown the villain's aura for 10 seconds. Even though it's Sable's best perk, it's still pretty bad. For starters, going to the basement for a heal requires you to be in the basement, which is a particularly bad place to be against most villains, but especially ones like Huntress, Jason, and Springtrap, who can easily 2-tap you on the staircase out. Second, basement spawns can be determined by offerings on some maps, but the chances of you only playing near the basement for the entire trial is pretty low, and the time spent going to the basement is always going to vary. I tested this out in multiple games, and the travel time took on average 15 seconds, and I ran across another survivor willing to heal me on more than half of those times. In the end, running self-care without botany ended up saving more time. With all that said, Sable ends up in the middle of D tier, which is sort of like the basement of tiers, so she's going to feel right at home. The Bard's best perk is Bardic Inspiration, which works by playing a lute for up to 15 seconds and performing a d20 roll with different effects that last 90 seconds after completing the performance. If the roll is a 1, you scream without giving the villain a notification. If the roll is a 2 through 10, then skill checks grant a 1% progress. If the roll is 11 through 19, then skill checks give 2%. And if the roll is a nat 20, then skill checks give 3% progress. The value of this perk can also be shared with other survivors if they're within 16 meters of you. This perk is a little bit of a mixed bag, but let's be honest, most survivors running it use it as a fun perk rather than one to get value from. If you're using this perk for fun, I'd say it probably belongs in B tier. However, the actual value of this perk is overshadowed by so many others, which is going to place the bards down at the top of D tier. Lara's best perk is Finesse, which gives you a 20% faster vault speed with a unique animation when you're at full health before going on cooldown for 30 seconds. The strength of this perk is the obvious vault speed that can save you from an animation hit, but also the fact that it's not impacted by exhaustion, which makes it synergize with no shortage of other perks. The only real downside of this perk is that it only works when you're at full health, which means it's not going to be so great against Legion and Plague matches. Even with this small downside, this is a great perk for chase, which is going to place Lara in A tier. Trevor's best perk is Exaltation. This perk activates after a successful pallet stun by upgrading the rarity of the item that you're holding to the next tier if it's available, and recharges the item by 75% if it is. The cool thing about this perk is that the upgraded item remains upgraded if you escape the trial, and also the recharge effect, which works like an instant build to last. On original release, I would have placed this perk down in D tier, however now that they've changed it where you can keep the upgraded item and the recharge rate was buffed to 75%, it's a pretty fun perk to run. This places Trevor at the bottom of B tier. Tori's best perk is Shoulder the Burden, which you can activate while unhooking another survivor to take a hook state away from them and add it to yourself. This perk can only be activated once per trial and when you're not on death hook. After shouldering, you scream and become exposed for 40 seconds. Shoulder is one of those rare cases where the perk can deny the villain one of their strongest strategies of tunneling, however, you don't really see this perk run outside of Swifts. With the recent update, which allows you to see teammate loadouts throughout the trial, this may change over time. However, solo queue perks are always going to prioritize their own survival rather than the team's. Even with its strength, I'd place Tori towards the middle of A tier strictly due to the fact that communication issues always occur in solo queue. Aurella's best perk is Do No Harm, which increases your altruistic healing speed by 50% for each hook state on the survivor that you're healing. As a plus, there's also a 3% bonus for every great healing skill check that you hit. This perk is great for fast heals on the most vulnerable survivors. However, its clear competitor would obviously be Botany, which gives a flat 50% healing speed at all times regardless of hook states and also on self heals. Still, this is a great altruism perk and it's going to place Aurella towards the middle of B tier. Rick's best perk is Apocalyptic Ingenuity, which activates after you open or rummage 2 chests and can be used when next to a broken pallet to create a fragile pallet in its place marked with a big X. Now I'm just gonna say it because we're all thinking it, this perk is bad. I think it's a pretty cool inclusion of the 2v8 pallet rebuild class, but the fact that it's a fragile pallet and requires so much to activate with so very little payoff just makes it not worth running. For example, I played I think 5 games trying to get value out of this perk, and let's just say I'm only showing you the rebuild part of this perk because I got 0 value out of this perk. Until a potential rework someday, I'm just gonna place this all the way down in F tier. Michonne's best perk is Conviction, which activates after completing an altruistic heal and can be used when your dying state recovery reaches 25%. Once activated, you're back on your feet with the broken status effect for 30 seconds, after which you'll be returned to the dying state. The cool thing about Conviction is that it can realistically save a slugging scenario by adding pressure back to the trial to get unhooks or pick up other slugged survivors, activating the perk again. Now, Conviction is a little build dependent, for example, Soul Guard so that you have endurance, Plot Twist so you can go somewhere safe and fully recover, Unbreakable if you don't have Conviction up, you name it. However, in endgame when you're using it as a last-ditch sprint to get to the exit gate, let's be real, that's what we run Conviction for. Still, this is one of the more unique anti-slug perks that have been released, and it's going to place Michonne towards the middle of B tier. V's best perk is Ghost Notes, which causes your scratch marks to disappear 50% faster when you're exhausted, and exhaustion recovers 10% faster. This perk is yet another mixed bag for me, since perks that cause the villains to lose survivors are, surprise, typically used by ratting survivors rather than ones looking to hold down chase and support the team. Another downside of this perk that a lot of people don't think about is that scratch marks can get very confusing when you're looping the same tile, and sometimes they're not going to realize you've even left the tile until your scratch marks disappear. This places V down in D tier. Dustin's best perk is Bada Bada Boom, which, let's be real, is exactly like Chemtrap and has the same activation requirement, but instead of pallets, it works on windows. After completing 20% repair progress on a gen, this perk activates and can be used to trap any window for 60 seconds, the aura of which will be shown to all survivors. If the villain basic or special vaults the window during this time, the trap activates and they're hindered by 50% for 4 seconds. One of my favorite things about this perk is that windows may be a rarer resource on maps than pallets are, however, barring entity blocking, they're an infinite resource, which makes its potential so much stronger. This places Dustin just ahead of Ellen Ripley in B tier. 11's best perk is Extrasensory Perception, which is activated when you crouch for 4 seconds, which will give you the elusive status effect but also oblivious. After these 4 seconds, an expanding radius up to 44 meters will reveal pretty much all things on the map, from your teammates to the villain to totems and resources. This effect lasts for up to 11 seconds or when you leave crouch before going on cooldown for 40 seconds. The cool thing about this perk is it's like a more valuable detective's hunch on demand, but also with the elusive effect, it's easy to help deny them aura reading while also seeing map details. This places 11 towards the top of C tier. Quan's best perk is 5 moves ahead, which quickly rose towards the top of the leaderboard due to its unique strength. First, it shows the aura of the nearest 5 windows or pallets while in terror radius or in chase. Second, after dropping a pallet, you move away 50% faster. And lastly, it has a very short cooldown of 20 seconds after you drop a pallet. During this time, there's no faster animation speed or resource auras. The real strength of this perk lies in the shorter animation, and I can't tell you now how many times I've dodged animation villains such as Huntress, Xeno, and now Jason by not being locked in animation. This is also really strong if they decide to loop around the tile, which is going to give you more distance if they're going around to cut you off. With its versatile value and strength in chase, I'm putting Quan towards the top of A tier. That's it for the list, and if you made it this far, I genuinely hope that this helped with your knowledge surrounding Survivor Teachables. Regardless of the perks that you run, your playstyle, or experience, I hope you enjoy running whatever perks you want and that you have fun in your games. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hasta la vista, baby.